as usual. 8:40 here, Big 550 KTRS. Just enough time to check in with David Stokes from the Show Me Institute. David, good morning.
Good morning, McGraw.
We should say next hour we're going to check in with Chris Higgins of Fox 2 News via Skype, hopefully, and he's up in Jerseyville. He can give us a complete list and rundown of what happened and tell us more about the ongoing storm. But David Stokes braved the bitter wind chill and the 17 feet of snow to get in here. Good morning, David Stokes.
I fought through it to be here with you.
Yes, you did. All right. You want to talk about eminent domain in the city.
Eminent domain abuse is rearing its ugly head again in the city of St. Louis.
What's going on?
Well, their plan is to attract the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, which is currently located in the city of St. Louis, but looking to move. And there are a number of locations in the region which they're considering. And the city of St. Louis, in a bid to keep them in the city, has proposed a plan in North St. Louis, which unfortunately will involve taking about 50 homes, roughly.
Okay.
And I just think that's wrong. Now, let me admit, it may not be as egregious an abuse of eminent domain as for a private retail store, for a Toys R Us, or the type of thing we've seen.
Or the third hardware store in a half a block as they're building the Menards next to the Home Depot and Lowe's.
You cannot believe the demand for hardware supplies in Richmond Heights. I mean, it's unbelievable. But it might not be as egregious as some of what we've seen. It is a public building. There's some public nature, obviously, to it. The Defense Department, the Geospatial Intelligence Agency, they protect all of us. That said, there are plenty of other options within the region. These jobs they might leave the city of St. Louis and those earnings taxes might leave.
Right.
But the jobs and the people aren't going to leave. And I just don't think it justifies taking these people's homes in North St. Louis. I've seen on some of the news stories, some of these families have lived there for decades and decades. And I really think taking their home for this agency move, which isn't even a done deal yet, that they'd pick this site anyway, I think it's a big mistake.
How many jobs are we talking about?
We're talking hundreds of jobs and millions of dollars in earnings taxes.
Right.
I mean, it's a substantial amount of money, no doubt about that. But I don't care how much money it may raise for the city. Those jobs, those people, they're not leaving the region no matter where they pick. And and under no situation do I see going to somebody who's lived in a house for 40, 50 years and say, I'm sorry, we can't accept them moving to Scott Air Force Base or St. Louis County, so we have to take your home. I think that's awful.
Let me play devil's advocate for a second, because you're thinking regionally, okay? And so they move from the city and they go to somewhere else in the region. That means it's a win for the city where it's going into, and it's a loss for the city of St. Louis, even though in the region it's a wash. So the city wants to do everything they can to keep them in the city. And the city is somewhat at a disadvantage because they don't have land to redevelop like other places do. Right? They don't have just a farmland that they can own or buy or rent or parcel together to sort of make a space big enough for it. So the only other option would be to condemn or eminent domain some of these properties.
Correct.
Yeah. So if you were never to do that, you would never have any redevelopment in St. Louis City, right? If you can't use eminent domain for a ballpark or the new Ram Stadium or for this type of deal, you're going to be left with old, decrepit buildings that more and more people leave from, and you can't do anything to sort of revitalize the area.
Well, that's what they say. That is the common the common statement that, oh my God, we have to use eminent domain. That's just not true. If people want to redevelop property, they can offer good money to buy property to redevelop. I mean, there are so many. This growth, this economic growth, the miracle of America did not occur because of eminent domain. I mean, all the shops, these office buildings we're seeing, we look out these windows.
Right.
The vast majority of them, almost all of them, did not involve eminent domain. They just involved people buying a fair price for property, and then people choosing to sell.
But eminent domain,
that's how it usually works.
Eminent domain is you get a fair market value for the house, though. Right? I mean, but
according to the government.
Well, okay, what's fair market? But I mean, the government doesn't come in and just take it and not give you anything for it.
They do, but we saw with the Metrolink expansion, we saw an egregious abuse of the power, meaning Metro didn't offer anywhere near enough for the property it took, and they went to court and lost.
Right.
But they forced the people they bought from to take them to court to get a judgment for more money. That's a very common happening in these types of cases. We look. All the growth, the development over 40 years here, we're looking out these windows, it didn't occur with eminent domain. It occurred because people offered money and people were willing to sell. If somebody doesn't want to sell their house, they shouldn't be forced to sell their house. This isn't a road or a sewer or something that has to go there. And again, I'll repeat, a public building is certainly more defensible than the new Menards in Hadley Township, but thankfully in the end did not involve eminent domain as much as Richmond Heights wanted it to.
It was a TIF, though. There was a TIF.
There was a TIF, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I'd be completely opposed to any subsidies in any of these other regional areas for this national agency, and I don't think that's going to occur. I mean, the agency doesn't really pay taxes other than employment taxes. There's no property taxes there to subsidize in the first place.
Yeah.
But I just do none of this, and I've looked at it, the importance of the city keeping it, and they all want the jobs. None of it to me is going to justify forcing that family to sell a house that they don't want to sell.
So can it safe to say that you're against eminent domain for the new Rams Stadium as well on that parcel of land they're talking about?
I am.
Yeah.
And that's one of the interesting side notes to that is that the eminent domain issue could be every bit as ugly and every bit as nasty as the huge subsidy taxpayers are being forced to pay there. I don't think that eminent domain, I think it should be done entirely privately, and there should be no eminent domain involved. And correct me if I'm wrong, and maybe it was easy because they built it so close to the prior stadium, and they might have owned all the land already, but they built the new Cardinal Stadium without any
They owned all the
domain.
land. They owned all the land there.
They still deserve credit for coming up with a plan that involved property they already owned and they didn't have to do it.
Yeah. What would you say to Governor Nixon, who said, if we don't do anything with this land, it'll look like this 10 years from now?
We've got a video up at showmeinstitute.org, which we put together. Joe Miller from our office put together a few weeks ago. I mean, the idea that, we need these stadiums to redevelop the area is such a canard that's been disproven time and time again. Look, the Edward Jones Dome did not revitalize the area around the Edward Jones Dome. You know, the area south of it was downtown, and the area north of it was never revitalized because they built the Edward Jones Dome there.
Right.
It's just a promise that people consistently make in city after city. You don't see these stadiums come in and just suddenly the area around it is just a boom town.
I agree with you, but in the 10, 15 years I've been here, Washington Avenue has changed over, and that's not necessarily because of the Edward Jones Dome, but that area looks infinitely better today than it did when the Edward Jones Dome opened up. But to the south and to the west or the east of the dome, it looks as bad as it ever has. I mean, you've had the Lumieres there and a couple other nice things, but you're right in a sense that there wasn't a lot of redevelopment because of that Edward Jones Dome.
The Dome didn't bring it in. Washington Avenue, it's to the great credit of both entrepreneurs and, unfortunately, overly generous use of tax credits at the same time. But the entrepreneurs on Wash Avenue deserve a great deal of credit.
Right. I thought about this the other day, and with a TIF, you have to deem a property blighted, right? That's part of the process, right? You have to deem the area blighted to then get the economic benefit of a TIF.
For almost all types of TIF.
Right, yeah. What I find interesting is you drive down any street in Ferguson or some of the main streets that were looted in Ferguson, and those burned out buildings, right? Burned out building after burned out building after, they're just sitting there, and it's just horrific. You could make an argument that some of those places are blighted, right? And maybe it's time for some redevelopment to sort of go in there, and maybe a big box store, maybe a this, maybe a that. You know, that's blighted, and no one's doing anything or talking about doing anything with it, right? But they can build a high-rise hotel or a high-rise apartment complex in Clayton and call it blighted so they can get all sorts of money for it. But an actual blighted area that's been looted, nobody wants to build on that, even though you can make the real argument that that's actually blighted.
That is. Whether or not we'd support, I support investment in Ferguson.
Right.
And maybe if anywhere in Missouri is now justified for tax subsidies, it would certainly be those parts of Ferguson.
Right.
So it's all the more reason to not be doing it, asking it for apartments in Clayton or condos in the U City Loop. Now there's a new development in the Loop that is demanding subsidies for the near it. Even though it's right on the Loop, it's a fantastic area. There's no need for subsidies.
Right.
And the part in Clayton that we see from this window here is that goes to court, I understand, in a few weeks here.
You want
interesting to follow.
You want a high-rise, high-end apartment complex? Put it smack dab in the middle of Ferguson, right where some of those burned out buildings were. Right, and then sure, get a TIF. You want to do there. You want to put your money where your mouth is. We'll give you a little incentive. Put it right there.
I would agree. McGraw, Millhaven, and David Stokes would probably not attack that TIF. if it went to the places when it's used in places where it's legitimately justified. Areas that fit the common sense definition of blighted.
Right.
I've always objected to TIF far less.
Right.
But the fact is, it's rarely used in those places. It's always used in places that don't need it at all.
Right. The reason why those stores are still burned out is because Walmart doesn't want to put a store there. If Walmart wanted to put a store there, those would be torn down and be already turned over. So, all right, we got to go. When can we read you? When can we see you?
We got a lot of information on eminent domain up at showmeinstitute.org.
David Stokes, have a good week.
Thanks, McGraw.
Stay warm. 8:51 KTRS.